Welcome to At Issue. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. My name is H. Wayne Wilson. The Child Maltreatment Report from the Children's Bureau came out in January of this year. It had numbers from 2015. Those are the most recent numbers that are available regarding child abuse and neglect. Those numbers are a bit alarming. The increase in child abuse referrals went from 3.6 million in 2014 to 4 million reports in 2015. The number of children involved, 7.2 million. That's a jump from 6.6 million. And the number of deaths due to child abuse or neglect in the United States of America, 1,670 in 2015. That is an increase of 90 kids over the previous year. 1,670 children die because of abuse or neglect. And we're going to have a conversation about the numbers locally and programs that are in place that will help reduce those numbers in the future. To have that conversation, I am joined by Jeff Gress. Jeff is the president and CEO of Crittenton Centers located here in Peoria. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tiffany Powell also joins us. Tiffany is the Family Support Services Director at Children's Home and Aid over in Bloomington Normal. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also with us, Pam Perillas. Pam is the Executive Director of Court-Appointed Special Advocates. They represent young kids in the court proceedings. We'll talk more about that role in just a moment. Thank you for being with us, Pam.
Thank you.
And also with us is Dr. Channing Petrock. She is with the Pediatric Resource Center, and it is an organization that often identifies cases of abuse and neglect. Dr. Petrock, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Before we have the conversation here in the studio, videographer Todd Pilon and I had a chance to talk to a person from Dayton, Ohio, who is nationally recognized for his expertise on child abuse and neglect. Let's go to that video and we'll talk about that right after this.
There's a report made of suspected child abuse once every 10 seconds. It's estimated that between 4 and 8 infants and young children die in the United States every day from abuse or neglect. In the majority of cases, probably more than 80%, the source of abuse is somebody that's known to the child, someone in the home often, or someone in the child's day-to-day life, a caregiver, a babysitter. There's a myth out there that child abuse is often perpetrated by a stranger, and we spend a lot of time talking about stranger danger and how to protect yourself from strangers, but it turns out it's often people closest to the child that are the perpetrators of abuse. What I find is that maltreatment is a pattern that recurs in the home, and so what might start as a simple slap or a pull of the child's leg, over time as stress increases in the house, as demands on the parent's time increase, that we see that abuse escalate as well, and the degree and the severity of it. As pediatricians, it's important that we're talking to families before they have babies about what to expect when the baby comes. It's important that parents appreciate that babies are going to cry all the time, that babies are not going to sleep throughout the night, and sort of setting the stage for reasonable expectations for new parents, especially young parents. Young parents tend to get more stressed out than older parents or people who have had children before. In every state, people can call Children's Services anonymously and report a concern of abuse or neglect, and it's their job to follow up on those calls. And I always tell people, doctors or parents or babysitters, you don't have to be right. If you have a concern, make the call and let the people with the training and the expertise sort out, what's abuse and what's an accident. But I'd rather people err on the side of making that call or having that conversation rather than just letting it go.
Jonathan Thackeray talked about the importance of prenatal care to make sure that we start as soon as possible to help prevent abuse and neglect. What do we know about that particular aspect?
Most of the time, the obstetrician isn't necessarily talking about the infant, they're talking about the pregnancy. So there's not a lot of information given to parents during that phase of pregnancy unless they're taking specific parenting classes, which some people do, but not everybody can manage. So then when the baby comes, a lot of parents younger ones in particular, don't understand child development. They don't understand why the baby's crying, and sometimes they think it's personal to get back at them. So without understanding child development, then we have an increased risk for abuse. But there's really not a lot of focus on what's going to happen with the baby, other than do you have the crib, do you have the car seat, the basics during the prenatal phase.
Jeff, at Crittenden Centers, you have a lot of young children come in. You offer a safe environment, a learning environment for families. But do you see them prior to having the child? Do you see the parent prior to that time?
Oftentimes we get that opportunity, and that's a good time for us to be able to match up with a parent educator now to teach them some of the skills. Because one of the things that we've realized is, a lot of the parents are younger and they did not have an example before them, and so you're talking about second generation of that, and they don't really know where to begin with a lot of these things. And so having the opportunity to be able to have those classes, have some one-on-one kind of work with them to really kind of instill those skills.
Is that true over in McLean County with Children's Home and Aid?
Yeah, we provide home visiting programs to teenage parents and who are pregnant, and we work a lot with them to let them know what it's going to be like when the baby comes. A lot of education on just meeting that infant's basic needs and what it might be like. Some babies might have colic and they may be a little more difficult to soothe. So that way they're prepared for what could happen when they come home from the hospital.
There is a national act. It is the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 2010. It defines the minimum definition of abuse and neglect. States are free to redefine that beyond that. Most states identify 4 areas. Some states go as far as 6 different areas of abuse. So before we talk more about services, I'd like to talk about the different types of abuse. And let's start with physical. I think that's the most obvious one. And you see a lot of that at the PRC.
We do. Physical abuse is the most obvious because it's almost always outward signs. So there's bruising, or there's some injury to the child that's visible, a limb that's injured and they're not using it and they have a fracture. So it's an easier type of abuse to discern compared to the other types, sexual abuse or neglect.
You mentioned sexual abuse is one of the 6. Do you see different changes in personality? Is that how you identify that most easily?
Sometimes it is. The child's disclosure is the most important, though. And so the schools now are teaching about sexual safety, which is good based on Aaron's Law. So that helps us. And we often will have a child disclose after they've been through that program. So teaching children about sexual safety, and we encourage the pediatricians that we train to talk about sexual safety frequently during those early years of the child's life so that they understand what is and is not appropriate. But usually it's a child's disclosure or a concern by a parent.
A third form of abuse would be emotional abuse. That could be constant criticism, something like that.
Yes, it's either verbal abuse is a component of that, or sometimes isolating one particular child in the family so that they don't eat with the family, they don't participate in any family activities, and they are really emotionally abused because they're completely isolated.
One that would seem to me to be difficult to identify would be neglect, because neglect would have an impact over a longer period of time. Is there some way of identifying neglect?
There are, and there are different types of neglect. There's medical neglect, where you're just not providing the basic medications or medical services your child needs. There is just basic neglect, like not providing food, so not feeding your child or not having adequate housing, or basically meeting the needs of your child. So sometimes it's easy enough to sort out, and sometimes it's a little bit harder.
Most states, as I said, identify those 4. There are 2 other forms of abuse that are identified in at least some states. Abandonment is one of those, and also exposure to substance abuse. So it's not just if you're making meth in the house, you could be not just guilty of making the meth, but of actually putting your children at risk and identified as abuse. Before we go any further, I want to talk about young children quite often don't have someone to speak on their behalf. and they're nervous, they don't understand the system, certainly, that's where CASA comes in. Can you give us the short definition of what CASA is?
Sure. So these are children that have been removed from their placement and they're going through the system. They could be in a relative care, they could be in a foster home or a residential facility. So CASA comes in place when a judge will appoint us to advocate for their best interests. There are a lot of people in a child's life when they're in the system, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. A volunteer who's appointed just to that case will see those things and bring them before those in the court system to better make decisions about what the child needs and how to move that case along. So our volunteers would, visit the child in the foster home, visit them at school, visit them and observe the visits with the biological family.
And these are volunteers?
They are volunteers. And they are trained to be able to look for signs. They're not trained to make a decision, a professional decision about whether abuse or neglect has happened. But by their reporting those things can bring extra services that the child may need. Because many times these children will disclose sexual abuse to their volunteer. They've developed a safe rapport, and it's a way for them to communicate what's going on in their life.
And once again, CASA represents court-appointed special advocates. What I'd like to do is have kind of a roundtable discussion about how you all interact, because there has to be a point where there's an initial identification of abuse. There has to be a role that you would, at Children's Home and Aid or at Crittenden Centers, would provide a safe environment, and what you just talked about. So could we start at the beginning, and once it's identified, and then how does this go through the process?
Sure. So with the Pediatric Resource Center, we are specifically designed to do medical evaluations when there's a concern of abuse or neglect. So typically if we get a referral from law enforcement or DCFS or a physician or a parent, somebody's already concerned about abuse or neglect. And then I would evaluate the child and do a thorough evaluation for any medical problems, anything that might be related to abuse or neglect. And then if a determination is made, so if in my opinion, and there's a lot of medical evidence to back it up, that there is abuse or neglect, then the child, through DCFS and their investigators, will either go into a foster home or maybe a safety plan, depending on what happened. And that's where I make recommendations that all of these other people become involved, because the child is going to need follow-up services, not just medical, but they're going to need counseling. It should be trauma-informed. They're going to need services. Sometimes the parent needs services. So there's a lot of services that we utilize in the community and work with other agencies so that we're not duplicating efforts.
To be clear, the initiation of this could come from any source, though, right?
Correct.
It could be law enforcement, it could be a friend, and as Dr. Thackeray said, don't hesitate. Rather to report now and be wrong than to not report at all. So then a child that has been identified as being abused or neglected in some way, they need a safe environment. So they would turn to, in Peoria County, Crittenden Centers?
Yeah, we would work with children and families in that way. We're also like a pressure relief valve for families that are experiencing chaos and stress in their families and just need their own kind of self-imposed time out. And so they would access the crisis nursery that way to just kind of get things sorted out and work with one of our workers to kind of help manage life and figure things out.
And by the way, Crittenden Centers is 125 years old at this very point in time.
It is.
In fact, you just had a big celebration a couple of weeks ago.
We did. Yeah.
And even older is Children's Home and Aid, about 130 some years. But similar situation?
Yeah, and we try to work with families before that hotline call is made to provide prevention services. That way we can educate them and get them the support they need. That way, hopefully, child abuse and neglect doesn't happen. That's one of our goals.
So both of you have multiple programs depending on the need of that particular family.
Correct.
And you have, so once that there's a safe period of time, do you follow up on this?
Yeah, because what we've learned a long time ago is if you just take the situation at face value, you really don't resolve the issues. You got to kind of dig a little deeper. So by allowing our parent educators to get involved, to come alongside that parent and begin to see what some of the challenges are for them or what some of the deficits are that they're experiencing about how they could do a better job of raising their children, and really what's available in the community. So we're not the end all. We may access other agencies in the community that could do something better than what we're doing. So it really is about helping them kind of map out their life and put it together in a meaning way for them.
And during this period of time, it might be a case that the child is in the court process, and that's where you come in.
And many times we've had children that our volunteers will actually go to Crittenton to help, fulfill some needs there. Sometimes children are moved abruptly from one placement to another, and subsidy hasn't hit yet for a foster parent, and they don't have money for formula or diapers, and the volunteer will work with that foster parent to get some needs met by the Crittenton Crisis Nursery, which is great.
And CASA exists for young people who need assistance going through that court process.
Right. It could be children from 0 to 21. I know most cases close at 18, but sometimes there are situations where they keep us on until 21.
What about adults who need assistance, Jeff?
As far as providing the parenting classes, we always have ongoing parenting classes, and to be honest, that is really going to get to the cause of what's going on more so than just providing temporary care or some of those things that Pam talked about.
But they would, in terms of helping them through the court process.
Oh, well, we're getting ready to launch. We just established a partnership with DCFS. We're getting ready to launch a family advocacy center that will work with those parents that are either already involved in the system or have been indicated but maybe have not been through the system yet. And it really is trying to keep them out and keep that family together and keep them in our community. So.
Might there be a similar service in McLean County, or are you thinking about it?
Yeah, there is a similar service in McLean County. It's not through Children's Home and Aid, but there is a similar service. And we've worked closely with them before on some cases that we've shared.
So let's talk about it. And I know that you're not in the legislature, but is there a role that the legislature plays in this?
There's a big role legislator plays in this. There's the Trauma Informed Care Act that's being processed right now that Children's Home and Aid has been a part of, which is very important that anybody who's coming into contact with children need to be trauma informed. There's adverse childhood experiences that children have happened to them, which is anywhere from any kind of abuse to neglect to just parents maybe being divorced or having a family member in jail. And anybody that's coming into contact with children need to be aware of those things that could happen and how we can work with those children to help them get through whatever trauma they've experienced.
These are all proposals, though.
They're proposals, yes.
They require money.
They do require money. And Children's Home and Aid has an approach now, it's called trauma-informed training. And so all of our staff, even if it's the front desk receptionist, gets what's called Trauma 101 training. Because sometimes that receptionist is the first person that comes into contact with the family that might be in crisis. And sometimes when they come into our agency in crisis, they're not always in the best state of mind. And so we need to be aware of kind of where people are when they come to see us.
Mentioning money, has the state budgetary constraint impacted Crittenton Centers and likewise Children's Home and Aid?
It has, but the void of a budget, I guess, is the bigger challenge is how they don't pay their bills on time and that they're so slow to pay, so it creates all sorts of cash flow problems. We've been fortunate enough that several of our funded programs don't sit in this stopgap measure. They're either embedded into some statute or into a consent decree or something else where that service hasn't been disrupted as much as just the way that they pay their bills, and it creates a lot of challenges for a smaller organization on the cash flow challenges. So.
And Tiffany, for you?
Yeah, we've had two programs in Central Illinois that have been affected. One is the Butterfly Project, which is a Safe from the Start program that works with children and their families who've been exposed to violence. The majority of the families we see are domestic violence. And it's a therapy program that works on rebuilding that parent-child attachment and helping that child feel safe again. And that has not been funded since FY15. The other program is our Healthy Families program that works with parents who are teenage parents prenatally all the way until that child turns 5 to make sure that that child's ready for kindergarten, working on parent-child attachment, and that program has also not been funded since FY15.
So what's been heard is preventive programs.
Yeah, preventive programs aren't being funded or being cut.
And that leads me to a discussion about sentinel injuries. That's preventive in nature.
It is. A sentinel injury is a subtle injury, so it might be one bruise on an infant who's not mobile, so they really shouldn't have bruising. And so what it tells us is that that family and those caregivers are in a situation where they were at the point where they hurt their child. So we now need to intervene. And what we've been trying to do is to educate everyone who sees infants or young children about what those injuries look like so we can intervene earlier. Because as Dr. Thackeray mentioned, what you see is a pattern of escalating violence toward the child, and then we end up with injuries that are severe head injury or abdominal injury or sometimes fatalities.
And then what about adverse childhood events?
So what we know from the studies that have been done is that any child exposed to violence in the home or abuse themselves or alcoholism, substance abuse in the home you get another number for each adverse childhood event. And so the higher your number, the more likely you are to have problems as an adult yourself with alcohol abuse or substance abuse, or to engage in risky behaviors earlier, to have health problems, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes. And so really addressing these things early on, either preventing or at least catching them early and then getting services that are appropriate for that child would make a huge difference in our adult population.
As an example, abused children will have a 25% more of a chance of becoming pregnant as a teen if, in fact, they were abused. So that's just one example of how that might have an impact. I showed some numbers at the start of the program about 1,670 deaths in America. How prevalent is child abuse and neglect, say, in Peoria County?
Currently, there are 951 pending abuse and neglect cases in one courtroom. So Peoria County is overburdened with the number of kids that are in our backyard, which is very high statewide. They're fourth highest in the state right now, and when you look at per capita, they're probably number one.
And it's nearly 1,000 active cases.
Yes.
We've talked about foster parents. Are there enough foster parents for those children that need foster care?
They always need more. You know, currently they have every child placed, but there are crisis times when they're, really trying to find a home for a child that has to be removed immediately.
So how does someone go about saying, I think I might be a good option for being a foster parent?
They also have to do is reach out to one of the foster care agencies. They can reach out to DCFS or Children's Home or Family Corps or Center for Youth and Family Services, Lutheran Social Services, and Camelot Care.
And on a similar vein, how does somebody go about saying, I think there's abuse in that family? And I know that's not anything that anybody wants to do, but how do they go about that?
So if you're a mandated reporter like physicians are, then we are by law required to call the hotline, the DCFS hotline, if we think there's abuse. Suspect, we don't have to know. If you're just the neighbor or a family member and you're concerned that there might be abuse, you call the same number that the rest of us do. It's 1-800-25-ABUSE. And you would speak to a hotline worker and you would give them the information. They'll ask you the questions so you don't have to worry about what to know, what not to know. But to try to get somebody involved to figure out whether there's abuse or neglect. So it's not, everybody's job to know. It's your job to be concerned enough about that child to intervene. And really the goal is always the child's health and safety. We're not out to get people. If you're calling about your neighbor or a family member, you're not out to get them. It's that you really want that child to be healthy and safe, and that is the ultimate goal.
And once again, that number is 1-800-25-ABUSE.
Correct.
And we also want the entire family to be safe. And you have both Tiffany and Jeff, you have programs to make sure that the continuum from childhood on up, there are programs to help the entire family.
Yeah, so we work with the parents starting prenatally, both of our programs do, and then we work with children and families through age 5, so until they go to kindergarten. And then if there's older children, we can make referrals to other community agencies for them.
And similar for Crittenden Centers?
Yeah, depending on the program, because we do have some programs designed specifically for teen moms as well. But like in our Child Development Center, it's up till they go into kindergarten, and in Crisis Nursery, it's up to their 7th birthday. So.
Okay. I thank you so much for the conversation and for, it's a difficult topic to discuss, but one that obviously with the numbers you shared with us is very important to have that conversation. So let me say thank you first to Jeff Gress, who is the president and CEO of Crittenden Centers. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us, as well as Pam Perillis, the executive director of Court-Appointed Special Advocates, and also Tiffany Powell, who is with Children's Home and Aid in McLean County, and Dr. Channing Petrock, who is with the Pediatric Resource Center, which is under the auspices of the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Peoria. Thank you all four for the conversation. I hope that you continue the conversation in your household. It's a very important topic. Please join us again for another edition of At Issue next time. Thanks for joining us.